Hi, I'm Devin Moore, your host for Humanity Rising's Race to Speak Up podcast and founder of hashtag Race to Speak Up, an anti-bullying organization. The Race to Speak Up podcast is a place where we have open and engaging conversations about bullying prevention, how to be upstanders, and how we are making a positive change in our communities. So the question now is, how do you race to speak up? Hello and welcome to the Race to Speak Up podcast. As always, I'm your host, Devin Moore. Today's guest is Tracy Myers. Tracy is a mother, sister, friend, and story seeker. Tracy lives deeply from an emotional place and invites all to join her there to explore our past, present, and future. She is the anti-racist leadership coach at Middle Waters. Middle Waters facilitates workshops and conversations, provides individual and group coaching, and consult with organizations, all towards the transformation of self, systems, and communities to become spaces in which Black, Indigenous, and people of color are seen, valued, loved, heard, powerful, wealthy, healthy, and liberated. Tracy's mission and that of Middle Waters is to resist white supremacy through the collective building of brave and transformative anti-racist leaders. They lead workshops that promote healing for people of color, coach anti-racist leaders, and provide consulting to organizations towards systemic anti-racism. Welcome, Tracy. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Devin. The sun is out in the Pacific Northwest right now. It's like been off and on all day today. So right now it's currently shining. So that must mean some good things for us.
Awesome. Well, so why don't you start us off with telling us more about Middle Waters?
Yeah, so Middle Waters is my consulting business that I just started. It's been a year now, actually. It's been a year of being on my own and being my own boss and leaving a normal 8 to 5 job working for a school district, doing similar work around racial equity, but now I get to do that full time and on my own terms and with people that I choose to be partnering with around being anti-racist leaders and transforming their systems around that. So you kind of already explained it in my bio as far as what we do. We provide coaching, consulting around systems change. I do my own workshops that everyone can attend if they just signed up through my website. But overall, I'm really hoping to, through the work that I do, really create those spaces like you already shared for, people of color to really thrive, right? And to be able to focus on their thrival and health and well-being for themselves and also within organizations.
How did this journey begin?
Well, I would just say when I have been in the last maybe 4 or 5 years working within school districts. So working at like central offices in school districts, so not necessarily in a school building. And in that work, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, myself have participated in a training that was 2 days long around building your racial consciousness. And, this is kind of when a lot of, quote unquote, DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion trainings had really, I think, like leveled up. And so, meaning it wasn't just around understanding people's different cultures, so to speak, but truly about understanding race, racism through your own lived experience. And so that was a really pivotal experience for me, being in that place of just coming like more aware around my racial experience, but also getting very angry because I think it was through that training that I realized how much I had assimilated into whiteness. And although from a young age, I was aware of being treated differently myself and also with other people in my life that were darker skin and different racial groups than it wasn't until there that I like truly got a moment to like dive deep into where that originated from and what I lost, to be honest, just losing and being aware that I didn't get to learn about my identity growing up. I didn't get to learn about my traditions. I'm Filipino, white, and Native American. And so not being able to learn the language, the culture, the traditions, and then realizing how much I had been socialized into white culture and how that really damaged me and even the relationships that I was in. And even as a mother of children, just was a really pivotal moment for me. And so from that point on, just continued on this path and journey of engaging in more learning, then becoming very vocal about that in my job, then getting into a position where that was actually my job of like training others around it. And so that kind of led me to doing it on my own. Just being very passionate around that and knowing that that's my life's purpose is really continuing to fight racism in everything that I do. But my biggest why for continuing that is my 3 children that I have and wanting to change the world for them so that they don't have to experience, hopefully, the same things, and I can help create and form their future, right? So it's a big dream, right? And if it's not them and it's their children's children, so be it. But at least I'm working towards that, and they're my reason why.
So yeah, I love everything that you said because I can relate to the fact that, getting assimilated really into this white society and kind of just having a lack of knowledge of my own culture. I know that I've definitely gone through that. And that's kind of honestly led me to want to learn more about my culture or just about, things my ancestors gone through, like where, stuff like that. I've always been interested in that, but because I've kind of been in this white society. Like I went to a predominantly white middle school. So, that's very much in my face. That was my, like the main thing that happened in my life during then. It was really just seeing a lot of my white peers and hearing things that they go through and like, reading books about white children and stuff like that. But I never really saw anything that could relate to me as a Black person or as a person of color. So, well, yeah, I know you understand. So I'm just like, we definitely need that in schools. I know times are changing. It's definitely a new year, but we still need that more and more in schools. We need that knowledge of our own culture. We need classes that allow us to really understand things like that. And I know you
Yeah.
have so you did bring up your workshops. Do you want to tell us more about your workshops?
Yeah. Yes. And then let's definitely get back to that because you just brought up something else for me. Yeah, I have 2 workshops that I do. The first one that I came up with was Rooted in Self-Love, which is just for folks who identify as people of color, Black, Indigenous people of color. And that was, I had came up with that before I even started my own business because I really truly felt like we needed a space of healing and we needed to come together. And a lot of times when we're in organizations who are now focused on racial equity, there isn't a lot of opportunities to get beyond just trainings that have to say racism exists. Right. And for a lot of us, we don't need that. We don't need that training that says racism exists. We know we've experienced it. We need something else, right? We need to know how do we continue to sustain in organizations that are predominantly white or that don't recognize us, that don't value us, that don't push us to really like be leaders. And because a lot of times those opportunities don't exist, right? Or those opportunities for leadership are scripted and against white standards and white norms. And so I created that training in order to create that space. What prevents us as folks of color to become anti-racist leaders when we're tired, we're fatigued, we're hurt, we're struggling, and a lot of times feel very isolated in this work. And so that was the purpose of that training. That is what continues to be the purpose of that training is doing some healing for ourselves, but then flipping that in order to identify what holds us back and what do we need and what do we need to plan for in order to keep doing this work as anti-racist leaders, but meanwhile healing and doing it from a place of authenticity and being who we are, not necessarily having to conform to what white culture says we need to do and be in order to be quote unquote successful. And then the Humble and Brave workshop came from a lot of folks asking for it. And that one is specifically for white folks that are committed to being white anti-racist leaders. And similarly to Rooted in Self-Love, it is also, again, to kind of be that next level training of what is holding you back, what's preventing you. And that's very different for white folks than it is for folks of color. And so a lot of times white people, once they choose to be anti-racist, they struggle sometimes with humility and bravery. So they're either like got their capes on and they're super ready to be super woke saviors in that space, and they get on the stage and then it becomes all about them, and they end up being the center of attention. And so part of the workshop is focused on how do you decenter yourself and how do you become very humble around the work. And then the bravery part is out of a lot of frustration for myself and with other people, is that a lot of people, they get into this awareness, they learn, they read a lot of books, they attend a lot of trainings, they watch a lot of movies, but they still stay silent when they are around even children. I worked in schools, right? They still stay silent in the hallways. I don't know how many times I've heard children, young people say, you know, why do you expect us to do anything differently when adults just stand by idly and they don't say anything, right? They hear the N word being tossed back and forth and they don't stop it. And so that bravery piece is missing because a lot of white people they're just afraid to do the wrong thing, right? To step on other folks' toes, or to lose their own like relationships with people. And so that's the reason for that training, is how do we help white anti-racist leaders be humble but still be brave and do something about it.
That's honestly very like cool, because I'm just like, I never would think that we would have programs or workshops where you can, like, for white people to become anti-racist leaders. Like, I know that's definitely out there. I'm not trying to act like that's impossible. It's just because I think it's just because of my like society. Like, I live in Long Island, New York, and I don't really see that. So that's, I'm like, we definitely need that in more of the world, because that just promotes unity. That just
Mm-hmm.
promotes unity. That promotes, love. Knowledge. It promotes so much knowledge. And so I know you wanted to go back to something I said prior to ask you the question about workshops, about assimilating into white society. So what would you like to add on to that?
Well, I just wanted to share. So I was getting ready for your podcast, and see, I had this sweater on. I was like, oh, I should change. And, again, these are ways that we assimilate, right? It's like, what should I look like to look more professional or something to that extent? And then I was like, oh, you know what? I know one of the questions is also kind of around how I have experienced race growing up. And you mentioned growing up in a predominantly white middle school, and I'm wearing my college hoodie, which is the only one that I've ever owned in my lifetime. And it's for University of San Diego. And that, I don't know if it still is, but we're talking like 20 plus years ago, was a predominantly white female space that I had to experience, post high school, going into college. The USD used to be, the kind of joke would be, this is for a university of spoiled daughters, because it was predominantly wealthy, rich, more females than there were males. And so it's just, your story reminded me of that experience. And one of the things that I think young people, we experience it through our K through 12 experience. And sometimes I think we hope we'll experience something different when we go to a university. And in my case, it actually got amplified going into this college. And being that it's a private institution, I went in with a full scholarship ride. And that was the case for most of the folks of color on that campus. Is we were there on a scholarship ride. A lot of them were in sports, had been brought to that school to play in sports. And we were a very small group on campus with predominantly white folks. And my first freshman year orientation was what I experienced. I called it like being in the sea of blondes, and being one, brown hair, curly hair girl in a group of predominantly blonde hair girls. But I mean, I went to school with girls who drove Hummers and Prowlers, and on their breaks went shopping at Fashion Valley Mall and came back, and everything, showing everything, had American flags on their nails as part of, just stuff like that. I was cruising in my 87 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme that had windows that didn't go down on this campus full of these wealthy cars. And so it's one of the experiences in my life that formed my view and my perspective of how wealth and race were intertwined, and that somehow not knowing and not being taught that in my K through 12 education, that not really understanding, like, why are me and my friends a small group here on this campus? Why do we struggle like to like fit in and to feel like we belong here? um, and then on top of that, like having that wealth inequity kind of blatantly in our face on a regular basis. A lot of my friends, like, we just struggled through a lot of depression, and um, you know you eventually find joy and resiliency through it, I feel like, through our like family of what we brought forth there. But it definitely is a smack in the face, and something that I'm just aware has like shaped my view of racism.
So yeah, I was actually gonna ask you. I know you mentioned that you like went through depression with that. I was gonna ask you like, how did that really affect your mental?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think one of the ways that uh, racism impacts folks of color that I spend a lot of time on is that we just stop believing in ourselves, right? We internalize all of this messaging that we get from the world. And for me, much of that is I don't see people who look like me, right, in positions of power and leadership and quote unquote people who are successful. And so to continue to like go to a college where that, again, was kind of the window I'm looking through, right? Is my professors, they don't look like me. We're not talking about I'm not being emphasized in like leadership. I was actually questioned a lot. I would ace my tests and the teachers would tell me that I've cheated. I was in like a senior year class and my teacher told me right away that I was going to fail and I wouldn't make it because I was a freshman. So just like constantly getting those types of messaging, along with not seeing a lot of people who look like me, and not being able to have a lot of friendships like that and feeling like I don't belong, definitely like impacted, like, am I going to finish this? Like, am I going to succeed? And then I think the part that gets you through is having family and loving people in your life and support, right? So I have an amazing family and parents who were there to support me. And then my friends also were there, that I created new friendships and friendships that I still maintained from school. They were there and we supported each other. So we would stay up late and we would help each other with our assignments, and we would make sure we had time to have fun, and we still worked. So I think knowing that I want a better life for myself and that I have the people around me who love and care for me definitely always have gotten me through any life valleys, from there as well. Um, Not that, I think my parents or the older generation know how to have these conversations, but just knowing that they love me and they believe in me, right, has helped me get through a lot.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us because I know that support is a big, big factor when it comes to like just not only just going through hate, but really just anything. You need support. But
Mhm.
especially when it comes to hate, you do need support. And being what's out of the quote unquote norm, feeling that called outcast. I'm just quoting those things because those are words that really do play a factor when you feel like you're not well. With me, I kind of just felt like I wasn't wanted, really. Like
Yeah.
when I went to my predominantly white middle school, I did not there were people who were like open to me, I guess. I like just being that because I was only in like a class with like three other black people. And so I saw a small amount of people that looked like me, but it was kind of a focus on the large majority of white people. So I learned about like white history. I learned about like, Jesus is white, like all that type of stuff. But then as time goes on and I'm not in that school now and I'm doing my own research, or I'm reading certain books, or like my parents are really telling me some other stuff too, about like history. And I'm just like learning, Jesus wasn't necessarily white, he was this, or like all these different things, this history. That's what we need to learn. And then just like going back to that aspect of feeling like an outcast, it's so terrifying to be at a young age and you feel like you're not normal. or at
Right.
least, in my experience, you feel like you're not normal. And it's so sad because that really does take a toll on your mental. And you're already, at this age, you're already developing still. You're still developing. So how are you able to go through feeling depressed or feeling anxiety or slowly like losing sanity actually too? Like all these different all these different negative uh effects and emotions. And I always say we need to fight the negativity with positivity, but
Mm.
these emotions are natural and it's due to your environment. It's due to that like lack of seeing what you look like, or lack of being able to really relate to other people. I think I'll just say it like that. Lack of really being able to relate to other people. So I think I see what you're saying in certain instances. I just like well, I can definitely relate to you a lot actually. So I just life is hard basically. No, but
That's an understatement. It's not just hard, but I think for people of color, especially if we are not in a community who looks like us and is telling us about our history and our culture and how it's beautiful and how we should be loved for that. And we do belong. We are not. We are being told on a regular basis that you use outcast. I use the word other a lot. Like we are being told we're the other. And in that otherness, right, then that makes us not normal, not human, not lovable, not enough, not worthy. Like you can go on and on and on about all of the ways that then eats at us and continues to tell us that we just can't do, can't be, can't live, can't breathe, like all of those things. And the way that combating is with positivity, but also just with love and people loving you, Devin, completely as you are, and not that you need to be anything but yourself, right? And for a lot of young people, including myself, I didn't know who I am was because I wasn't given that opportunity to truly get that from a non-white perspective and to get that from people who weren't racist, right? So um yeah, it's a human need for everyone to be loved and to belong. And racism, bullying, all of those hateful things completely take that away from people.
and I know something else that you have said is you say that you're a believer that people should not be judged by their titles. I know we also talked about this a bit earlier, but you say that you're a believer that people should not be judged by their titles, degrees, or what is deemed as qualifying credentials. We all have gifts, talents, and strengths that should be valued above these titles. Can you explain the importance of not being judged by titles?
Yeah, I think um titles are something that are almost used as a way to value people, right? It makes them more knowledgeable, more capable, and things like that. And I just feel that our lived experiences makes us so much more qualified. And I'll give like a really easy example. My background is in social work, and there could be somebody who finishes their 4-year degree and gets a master's in social work. I don't have a master's in social work and have absolutely zero experience yet in the field versus my 16 plus years of experience in the field. So that title doesn't necessarily mean that they're more capable or more prepared. Have they gone through more education than I have? Absolutely. That doesn't mean that they are more qualified and more experienced than me. And then let alone if it's a white social worker who's going into, let's say, a community of color, right? Are they going to be able to say that they have the lived experience of experiencing racism to be able to support that community or the people that they're working with from that community in knowing that background? They won't. So it's just one of those things that if we understand that racism has occurred historically and systemically, then we know that education has also been provided predominantly to white people with wealth through history. And so there are still ways in which people today who are like immigrants from other countries who come into our country, who are doctors, but once they hit the US, like those credentials are no longer deemed like qualified because it wasn't through our American system. And so there's just so many ways in which those credentials are just, in my opinion, not valid. And I never mean to do it in a disrespectful way for people who like have done a lot and gone through a lot of barriers in order to get their education. I just don't think that it's absolute truth. And that we should be able to value people based off of their gifts. If a 15-year-old can do a better job than me in I don't know, whatever it is, maybe building something just out of their own gift and knowledge. At this point, there's YouTube. You can learn all these things for free without going to school. I don't think that anyone should require that that person needs to have a certain certification in order to do that thing, and to hire them and work with them, or give them that responsibility.
So I want to ask you something really about like, what age do you think we should start having this conversation about race?
I think I have a 1.5-year-old and I have a 15 and a 16-year-old. So I feel like I've experienced in growing my racial consciousness as a parent, have done it at different ages with my own children. And so with that now, I already now with my 1-year-old have conversations about race. And I think it should be as young as possible. We know that through science, like we're socialized at a very, very young age to have association. And so we can associate race and skin color and physical attributes of people. We can either associate that with good and positive things or negative things. And so a lot of what is available now, which is amazing, is that we have like books and movies and videos that talk about race at a developmentally appropriate way for young people. Like there's Sesame Street videos now about embracing different races and being loving towards other racial groups that, you know, I have my 1-year-old listen to and watch and participate in. And so I'm not having I think that a lot of misconception is people think we're teaching 1-year-olds critical race theory and that white supremacy exists, and therefore we're teaching young people to hate white people, right? And that's not what we're talking about. That's not what we're talking about. Right? We're just hoping to undo what has been done generations before us, which is to believe that white is better and white is the only way. And so teaching my son that there are people who look different, have different skin colors, and that gets to be who, you know, the amazing options and opportunities he sees in the world for himself as a young boy of color. Like that's not hate, right? That is love. And it's still a conversation about race.
See, now that kind of brings up another topic that comes to mind is Stop Asian Hate. So, which I kind of really just want to see, like, what are your views on like, well, actually, have you been like looking at the news? Because I saw a lot of as far as that, I mean, because I saw in like New York City, it was like this woman was followed to her house, is like quite some time away from where they originally were, and then she was stabbed in her home. And then there was like some guy at the store threw feces in another person's Asian person's face. It was a lot of those are two really gross and disturbed examples, but like how, like, I just first I want to ask you what are your views on it, and then I also want to see like is there a way that we can stop this hate? Or like,
Yeah,
let me know.
yeah, no, I definitely have views on it. I think as somebody who is part Filipina, which, you know, the Asian diaspora is a lot of different Asian communities. There is, I'll just say this, in my personal life as a multiracial person, I have also felt hate from the Asian community against me because I am not, I have felt like I have been told a lot of times in my childhood that I wasn't Filipino enough, not directly, right? But just in ways that people talked about me and my family, and not feeling like I could necessarily attend certain events and whatnot, and really feel like I belonged in that community. So even within myself, I acknowledge that there is some anti-Asian that I have within me, even though I am part Asian. And so and then the other part of it is recognizing that having grown up in a predominantly white community, I also have anti-Blackness as part of my socialization as well. Right. And so when I think about Stop Asian Hate, a lot comes up for me, because for me personally, there's a lot of Asians out there that are participating in racism, that are not, that have become very much aware of racism in the world due to this, Stop Asian Hate, because a lot of the Asian hate that's come up from COVID. And so in that light, I'm very grateful, because I'm hoping that that means more people are coming on board and becoming more aware of that racism impacts even Black folks, if they were not willing to see that before, that maybe this is like a segue into being able to be more open to that. But I will say that some of that, the frustration for me is, are you willing to come in solidarity with Black, Latinx, other darker brown, Black skinned folks, to continue on this mission of like raising awareness around hateful acts around the world? And some of that frustration for me is not seeing that hold true for some people, right? That they, there's a beautiful talk that I heard, and I can't think of her name right now. And I once I do, maybe I will send it to you. But is this concept of like just us in the Asian community, of like just caring for just us as Asian folks, and that would not be in solidarity with other communities of color. And there have been Asian groups that have stood in solidarity with other, like with Black and Latinx folks, specifically like in California, to be in solidarity against racism or against some unjust laws. And that's what I'm hoping that will come from it more. Like, that's where I'm hoping it'll lead folks. I just know that that's obviously not going to happen for everyone.
Yeah, I hope it also goes there too, as far as like coming together and like understanding each other. I mean, and like, so with me, I went to, and now we're just now we're going to talk about Black Lives Matter, because I went to a Black Lives Matter protest. I went to multiple, actually, peaceful protests. And, so I'm seeing different communities, like all coming together, showing that, these Black lives getting hated on and killed, murdered, and like treated unfairly, the policing system, like all these different systems, all these different groups, all these different racial groups coming together and showing that, we support you, they support us as Black people. It's so nice to see that, but then we like not trying to contradict or not trying to like necessarily look on the negative side, but this still does kind of sound like I'm looking at the negative side. Is still that factor of like the so many different groups who didn't come because they don't believe in this, or didn't come because they feel that Black people should be getting killed, stuff like that. But if we do, I always say things always can start with the conversation. Like you and me just having an open conversation. I'm learning things about you. I'm liking what I'm learning, because it's very much opening us up to each other and really being able to feel comfortable. Things start with a conversation, and the fact that people can come together for a peaceful protest, stuff like that. It's so actually kind of mind-boggling too, because I think if you were to ask me when I was younger, like say if I was like 12, I don't really think I would have thought that this would ever happen, that stuff like that would ever happen. But then again, I also don't think that I would have thought that a Black man would get kneed on his neck for, what is it, like 8 minutes and 46 seconds, while three other like police officers are standing around him and everyone's just watching, I don't really think I would necessarily also think that too. So it's just stuff like that I think that stuff that we definitely need to like look at and take into consideration with a bunch of other topics that we're already talking about. But I mean, just having that open conversation and really being open to learning and understanding each other and having that comfortability within it can really just go a long way. Seeing all these different groups can go a long way.
Yeah. And I think that is necessary. I think one of the things that I get asked all the time is, what are solutions to racism? And one of the things that I do let people know is you have to have relationships with people who are of a different race than you. You cannot read everything in a book and believe that you then know how, one racial group is treated in the world. You have to form relationships because every person, every human being has a different and unique experience, even though they may belong to a community. And so one of the things that I especially with people who aren't Black, I say, do you have Black friends in your life beyond your workplace? Are you in relation with other people? Do you go and go to the barbecues and go to, for me, everything is around food and gathering. So if you're being invited to my home for food, gathering, and a barbecue during the summer, I care about you deeply. I don't just invite everyone and anyone over to my home. And so I tell people, are you getting those invitations? Are you making an effort in order to build a relationship of true, genuine care and curiosity with people who are racially different than you? And when you do that and you genuinely care versus being forced about this person, you get to know about their lives, you get to know their children's names, you get to know their struggles, you get to celebrate things with them. Then you get to understand what race looks like and how people experience the world differently because of their race.
I agree. That is a really good point to bring up too. You know, and like, so I also know that you have a blog. Would you like to tell us about that?
Yeah, I don't get to it as much as I would like to, but I think, one of the ways that I guess is also like a healing and an outlet for me is to, write about my experience and write about the questions people ask me. And so, yeah, you could check it out on my website, but a lot of it is about my own personal journey and my own experience as a mixed race, person and growing up. And then other things are about, just what's come up for the day and talking about what's a hot topic or ways that people should lead, and consider based off of what's going on in the world. And I just always encourage people to reflect and write as part of being a leader. And when you do that, giving yourself that time to grow in your own mind. Grace Lee Boggs is are you familiar with her? Grace Lee Boggs?
Sounds familiar, but still tell me.
She's a Chinese woman who was an activist along the civil rights movement and really supported the Black Power movement. And one of the things in her biography, which is a movie, is she talks about how she moved from like being like revolution in the idea of resistance to revolution and the idea of the evolution of your mind. And one of the beautiful things that I just constantly get from her in knowing that is that we can liberate ourselves through our own mind and through breaking through the oppression that we hold internally within ourselves. And then we come out being powerful, human beings when we are liberated in that way. And so writing for me and reflection, I think, is a huge part of liberating ourselves from having that oppressed mindset.
Yeah, writing goes a really far way, honestly. Just kind of like, I can relate to that because I know I like to write poetry. That's kind of also just my way to really just escape too. But like being in that moment and say like I went through something just then and I really want to talk about it. And then people like to ask me a lot of questions too, because I work with the anti-bullying, or in that realm. And so there's been people who have actually really who reached out to me and said, Devin, I went through bullying and this person did this to me and the school did so and so, like all these different components, and just kind of it actually also kind of helps me respond to them because it's allowing me to really sit down, think about what's being told to me, and come up with either an effective solution or advice, or telling them just anything that I think is appropriate that they could do, stuff like that. And so I'm like, writing really does go a far way, or really just anything that allows me to get your emotions out. But writing is definitely one of the main ways that you can do that. It helps me a lot.
Yeah, definitely.
So what's been the most rewarding part of your journey?
I think the most rewarding part is when someone comes up after I've done like a talk or a training or meeting even, and just tells me that they're super grateful that I shared something that really resonated with them and helped them to kind of have like a what I call like their little aha moments of realizing kind of a point in their life that they need to like pay some attention to, and recognizing that it's been holding them back in some way. And so having that aha moment to really knowing that this is going to only be a seed that grows for them into some way of transforming who they are and how they show up in the world to be more fully themselves and authentic. And those are the best moments for me when people tell me those things. And you know, as a woman of color, like I've not been affirmed a lot growing up by other people. And this is a way that so I have, you know, imposter syndrome a lot, which I tell people that has a lot to do with racism, that we even have this belief that we're imposters. But I deal with that and I grapple with that. And so when I get that feedback from people, it reaffirms me and it lets me know that I am gifted and talented and I do have important things to say. And when I share my story, it's the most powerful thing I can do because people really, it's a heart to heart conversation. And that's very different than I'm a professor and I'm teaching you something. I'm just sharing about my life, and that story holds more power than me telling you do steps 1, 2, 3.
What are your hopes and dreams for your journey moving forward?
Hopes and dreams. Well, I mean, my hopes and dreams is to create more access. And what I mean by that is that I want to create more opportunities for more people to have access to what I do and the gifts and talents that I have. That doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be, you need to be sitting in front of me, but if I can teach others to do what I do and have those people doing similar things, then there's just more healing out there in the world. And so that's really it. So, you know, in the world of capitalism and racism and sexism, there's a lot of barriers to that for me specifically. And so it's more or less finding people like you and getting the word out. And even you just sharing this podcast, I hope there's something that either one of us has said, that it's free, it's available, people don't have to pay, right? And hopefully they get like a touch of healing from it. And so my hopes and dreams would just do that a million times fold and that more people are healed through the process.
Well, thank you for joining me today. This has been a really great conversation. And a lot of things that you said did resonate with me. So I felt very comfortable just speaking with you and hearing your experience.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I always hope that people feel like when they're talking to me, we're just sitting across a coffee table, enjoying whatever warm drink makes us feel good. And that's it. Yeah. I always want people to feel they can be themselves around me. So I really appreciate you having this conversation with me.
Would you like to share your social media platforms and website?
Yeah, my website is middle-waters.com. And then my social media is on Instagram. I think it's the same thing. Middle Waters LLC, actually, I think is what it is. You can find me on Facebook and LinkedIn too, just searching up Middle Waters.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for showing how you race to speak up and really create that positive impact in your community, Tracy.
Thank you, Devin. Take care of yourself.
And thank you to everyone listening. I hope to see you guys at future Race to Speak Up podcasts. If you have any questions about the Race to Speak Up podcast, feel free to contact me at racetospeakup@gmail.com. Make sure to go over to my website, www.racetospeakup.com. And also follow me at Race to Speak Up on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter for updates on future podcasts. Join the Humanity Rising movement. Humanity Rising offers scholarships for students making a difference in the world through service. Visit www.humanityrising.org for more information. And remember to ask yourself this one question: how do you race to speak up?